Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we'll be dealing with electrolysis in chemistry. So, electrolysis we can say that it is the breaking down of ionic compounds. These ionic compounds, they have to be in aqueous form or they should be molten by the use of electricity. So electrolysis is introducing us to the electricity in the field of chemistry. The only portion in chemistry whereby we use electricity, it is when we are dealing with electrolysis. So today we will be dealing with electrolysis. So like I have stated, that it is the breaking down of ionic compounds. From the lesson or the teaching of bonding, we learned that ionic compounds are the only ones that can conduct electricity. And for them to conduct electricity, they have to be molten or they have to be in a solution or in an aqueous solution. When you say an aqueous solution, we mean that they have to dissolve in water. That is the only state in which the ionic compounds, they can conduct electricity. So electrolysis, it is when we break these ionic compounds by using electric current or electricity. So here we have the setup of electrolysis. This is the setup. What we have here, it is the ions. The ions. We have the positive ones and the negative ones. And these ions are in a solution. This solution, we call it the electrolyte. And here we have the cell. You know that the cell is made up of the positive and the negative terminals. And what we have here, these poles that we have here, we call them the electrodes. We call them the electrodes. And the solution that we have here, we call it the electrolyte. So simply what we have in the setup of electrolysis, we have the solution. This solution can either be an aqueous ionic compound or it can be a molten ionic compound, and that we call it the electrolyte. So we can simply define electrolyte by saying it's a substance that conducts electricity or it conducts electric current when molten or dissolved in water. That is an electrolyte. Now we have what we call the electrodes. These electrodes are these terminals that we see here, these poles that we see here. These are, we call them the electrodes. Electrodes can either be a metal, a piece of metal, or carbon that passes current to the electrolyte. So in other words, your electrolyte should be a substance that is able to conduct electricity. So when we say carbon, we know that carbon, we have different forms of carbon. We should call them the allotropes of carbon. So the carbon that is normally used in electrolysis is graphite, because graphite is the only form of carbon that conducts electricity. So it is either we use a piece of metal or we use graphite carbon as our electrodes. And we use it because they are able to conduct electricity. So they are able to pass the current to the electrolyte. And as you can see that we have the positive terminal and we have the negative terminal. So this gives this electrodes a charge. So from the negative terminal, the electrode that we see in the negative terminal, we call it the cathode. We call it the cathode. The cathode is a negative electrode that attracts positive ions from the electrolyte. That's what we call a cathode. And then the other one, which is under the positive terminal in the electrolysis setup, we call it the anode. We call it the anode. So, which means that an anode is a positive electrode that attracts negative ions from the electrolyte. So we have the anode and we have the cathode. So one thing that you have to understand is that the cathode, which is negatively charged, it attracts the positive ions. So which means that as it attracts the positive ions, and we know that the atoms that become positively charged are the metals. So this means that at the cathode, what will be formed is the metal, what will be attracted at the cathode is metal ions, and hydrogen ions. These are the ions that will be attracted at the cathode. Why? Because the cathode, it is negatively charged. And for the positive ions to be attracted at the cathode, that's why we call it a cathode. It means that it attracts the cations. So this means that these cations, the metal ion and the hydrogen ion, when it reaches the cathode, it will accept the electrons from the cathode, and at the end it forms a metal. If it was a metal ion, if it was a hydrogen ion, it will form hydrogen gas. This is what is happening at the cathode. That as the positive ions are attracted at the cathode, they will accept the electrons from the cathode. That's why the cathode, it is negatively charged. It shows that it has electrons. So these ions, these cations, will accept the electrons from the cathode, and they become metals or hydrogen gas. And the opposite is happening at the anode. The opposite is happening at the anode. At the anode attracts the negative charged ions from the electrolyte. And the negative charged ions, they are the nonmetals. The nonmetal ions. Nonmetal ions, we can talk of the halides, we can talk of the oxides, we can talk of the sulfides. Those are the nonmetal ions. So, as the nonmetal ions are attracted at the anode, what happens is that the nonmetals will lose the electrons. Because we know that for a nonmetal to have a negative charge, it has gained an electron. So as they are attracted at the anode, what will happen is that these nonmetal ions will lose that electron and will form a nonmetal, the one which is stable. It can either be a gas or a liquid. It can either be a gas or a liquid. That is what we have under the cathodes and the electrodes. And that is what is happening. So we can take an example of molten lead-2 bromide. Let's look at the reaction that takes place under molten lead-2 bromide. And one thing that you have to note is that when you say the substance is molten, we mean that the ions which are present in the electrolyte is the lead-2 and the bromide. These are the only ions which are present. But when we say the substance is aqueous, the only present ions, is the ions of the substance for an aqueous substance. Let's say aqueous lead-2 bromide. So for an aqueous lead 2 bromide, the ions that are present, we have an OH ion, we have a hydrogen ion, we have a lead ion, and we have a bromide ion. So because it is aqueous, we have the ions of water. But now because we are dealing with a molten one, we only have the ions of that substance, which is lead 2 bromide. So what will happen at the cathode is that the reaction that will take place at the cathode, we are going to have our lead. And because we said at the cathode, the metal ion will accept the electrons from the cathode. So you're going to have lead 2 plus an electron that will be gained or accepted by this metal ion to form lead as a solid, which is a metal. It will end up forming a metal. So now you will have to balance your equation. You see here we have 2 plus. So which means for us to have a stable or a solid lead at the end, we will have to gain 2 electrons. So this is the reaction that is taking place at the cathode. The lead ion, it has accepted 2 electrons from the cathode to form the lead metal. And now the reaction at the anode. The reaction at the anode. We said that, or we mentioned that at the anode, what is happening is that non-metals will be attracted to the anode. And for them to be attracted to the anode is that what will happen is that they will lose the electrons. So we have the bromide ion. We have the bromide ion. And for us to form the bromide at the end, it will be formed in a form of a gas, plus an electron that will be lost and attracted by the anode. So this is the reaction that will take place at the anode. So we are simply saying, or what we are saying here is that at the anode, you're going to have a non-metal ion, which we call an anion. We call it an anion. An anion will lose the electron to form a gas, a bromide gas. So because at the end you formed 2 moles of bromide, that is 2 molecules of bromine, you are going to have to balance your equation by putting a 2 here and also putting a 2 here so that you balance your equation. So this is what I had for you today, guys, under electrolysis. Continue to follow my lessons and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out. Enjoy your day and keep on studying.